Last night I thought there was one deal, and I woke up this morning. Turns out there was another deal in the NBA. Marcus Smart, apparently, is now – it's the Grizzlies who get Marcus Smart from the Celtics in a 3-team deal. I don't think that's the headline. I think the headline, Tyus Jones is involved in the deal, but Kristaps Porzingis going to the Celtics.
So that's
a problem.
Can I wrap it up for you? Can I wrap up the total deal for you?
Yeah.
Okay, so we got Boston receives Kristaps Porzingis, who opts into his $36 million contract for 23-24. They get the 25th pick tonight in the draft from Memphis, and they also get a 2024 first-round pick as well. The Grizzlies, who are sending Tyus Jones to Washington, receive Marcus Smart, who I think adds a lot of value to the culture considering Ja Morant's missing 25 games due to his suspension. The Wizards received Tyus Jones plus the 35th pick from the Celtics, Danilo Gallinari, and Mike Muscala. I think it's a win all the way around. Look, obviously, the Washington part we will unpack in a little bit, Max, because they have just unloaded two of their biggest pieces in both Bradley Beal and now Kristaps Porzingis. But I think for Boston, you get a guy that had one hell of a year last year, probably had his best year since he's probably been in the league, and unlocks Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. Now, with this second apron, which you're hearing a lot of NBA teams talk about with the new luxury tax that they can't go over for Boston, these are the type of tough decisions teams have to now make, right? You can't carry that type of load on your roster with a guy like Marcus Smart. You have to make that decision. So by letting go of Marcus Smart, Derek White has to be activated, which he has been. He's been their third best player, I think, for a major part of this year and in the playoffs. So now with Kristaps Porzingis for this one-year deal that he has, it unlocks Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum in pick-and-roll situations. How many times have we talked about those two not being complementary towards each other? So it unlocks them. You get a 7-foot unicorn at the rim that can play alongside the likes of Robert Williams.
7'3". Yeah.
7'3",
yeah.
Right? 7-foot unicorn plus.
Yeah.
I love this for the Boston Celtics.
I love it, too.
It's a great move.
First of all, Marcus Smart, I know what this is going to sound like for a second because maybe I'll be very wrong and it's disastrous for them, right? I think, in a way, this might be addition by subtraction because he's a good player. But for a team like the Celtics, Jay, he might be just good enough to be dangerous to them, right? To prevent, when you say unlock your best players, maybe his personality, he's in a way a dominant player when he's on the court, even though his actual talent is not pitched as high as theirs, right? I think a guy like Kristaps Porzingis, maybe it's because I watched him when he was with the Knicks carefully when he was younger. But, man, when he gets on the court, at least back then, the whole offense for the other team changed because he's 7'3". He's a shot deterrer, and he can shoot from the outside. And for a guy his size, he can defend in space considering he's 7'3", right? Like, that's a lot. I was looking at his just numbers from last year. He played 65 games.
Yes.
That's, like, nowadays, that's considered like a full season. 65 games. And, look, I know different stats and this and that. I could tell you averaged 23 points and 8.5 boards and this many blocks and a block and a half. But the interesting thing to me, the reason I'll look at PER sometimes is player efficiency rating, the Hollinger stat, is because it takes into account a lot of the classical stats people like. And usually there's a strong positive correlation between guys with higher PERs and the guys you think of as MVPs, right? Usually if a guy's PER is above 20, you think of him as a very, very good player. And if it starts approaching 25, you're like, oh, wait, that's not even just a normal all-star. In 65 games, his PER was 23. Like, that's high-level all-star, really. That's a big piece to add with his size, the positions he can, the 4-5 that he can play on that team, obviously the 5, and the defensive presence, even whatever you think about him, he changes the offense a lot.
Well, let's talk about it, okay? So he's played, if you're looking at 65 games, the only time he's played more than 65 games, first 2 years of his career with the Knicks.
Right.
Okay? Career best last year in shooting percentage from the field, all right? Second best career scoring from the three-point line, percentage-wise, 38.5. I mean, and scoring-wise, best of his career last season. So you're getting a guy who's been through the gauntlet, Max, of being here in New York, getting out of that situation in New York, going to Dallas, playing with Luka, another ball-dominant guard, going through that situation, then going to Washington, D.C., right? Where, look, when you play for a bad franchise, a lot of people say, well, Bradley Beal, played only 50 games here and there. Well, when you're playing for a bad franchise and there's a lot of questions, everything comes back to you. You are receiving all the heat regardless, even if you guys are expected to lose. So I think playing through that, now having a chance to contend, I think the mentality is one that he still wants to earn it. So he still has a lot to prove, which you're getting a motivated Kristaps Porzingis.
So you just went through a couple of things. First, the first point you made before that point was that stylistically it works well in terms of the strategy that you could tactically, it's going to be very good for Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. Now you just talked about why it could work in terms of his attitude, his point of view, all that stuff, how that fits together and where he is in his career in terms of his maturity, right? Now think about it and I mentioned, actually, if you look at his numbers last year, he's a high-level all-star. Now think about this for a second. Aaron Gordon gets to Denver, and he's supposed to be like the fourth best player on the team. Turns out he's the third best player on the team. But the point is, like when Iguodala went to Golden State, when guys are cast as the lead, but it turns out on a championship team, they're like the 3 or the 4, and they can actually go and do that. It also unlocks them. So like when we think about big threes, because I don't think Porzingis is just like a role player. When you think about big threes in the league, how many teams have a third best player better than Kristaps Porzingis? A third best player. Maybe only the Phoenix Suns? Is there any other team with a third best player better? I'd say Bradley Beal is the third best player in that team. He's better than Porzingis. Very different, but is there anyone else in the league who has a third best player better than Kristaps Porzingis?
And it's about the size and how complimentary he is, because you can use him in all that ball screen action, which is what Boston plays a ton of.
And how tall is Tatum?
6'7",
I think
6'8".
Yeah, like 6'8". Jaylen Brown's a big guard. Tatum's a big forward, at least a big small forward if you think of him that way. Porzingis is just big, period. They have real size at their 3 best players at their position are also big.
So here's what's happening. So that deal happens last night, Max, and the first thing I think to myself is, well, damn, Boston just got better. Like Boston, it got even more explosive offensively, and you hand the ball to a guy like Derek White, and you say, okay, like there's not as much ego there, right? Like there's not, like, just be our leader. Be one of our floor leaders. You're able to retain Malcolm Brogdon because that deal fell through with the Clippers because of the injury history. They didn't want to accept it. So now you still have that depth if he can stay healthy. And you're looking at the rest of the Eastern Conference saying Chris Middleton opted out last night of a $40 million one-year deal, right? Essentially, so he's looking for a longer-term contract. And you're wondering, what the hell is Milwaukee doing? They have to sign him because it feels like in this arms race, they're being left behind. You still have questions with what's going on with Philadelphia. If James Harden comes back, if they're going to go for a guy like Fred VanVleet, what additions are they making to their roster? But you're looking at Boston saying, we're in position A in the Eastern Conference.
Jay, quiet is kept. I know Brogdon has an injury history, and there's concern going forward. He played the most games since his rookie season last year, played 67 games. And here's the thing, and you could say this about the Suns. You could say this about Denver. It's been true about Denver. The Lakers, the Clippers, this is the modern sports, right? You could say it about the Ravens, right? You could say it about so many teams in so many different sports. Baseball with the pitching injuries nowadays. Given health. And so you say, well, okay, but you have to look at what the likelihood is they're going to stay healthy. What's the likelihood that AD and LeBron stay healthy? What's the likelihood that Kawhi and Paul George stay healthy? What's the likelihood that Denver stays healthy, considering what Jamal Murray's been through in recent years, right? Like, they all have those questions. If this team stays healthy, they're getting out of the East. There's no team that's going to stop this team in the East, Jay. Brogdon, too. Like, Brogdon's a good player. If they stay healthy, they're getting out of the. If they stay healthy, they can win a championship now. This is the first time I look at that roster and think, oh, wait a minute. This is different.
And here's what I like about it. They're motivated, man. I mean, granted, look, every team is motivated. But Joe Mazzulla has something to prove, right? He has a chip on his shoulder.